as you all know, that I love education, I love learning, I love, you know, finding out about new things. And tonight we have a great opportunity to hear from some attorneys here. And our guest panelist is Kel London, who is practicing as a prosecutor, state attorney in the BVI, and Ms. Tamika Jude, who, Alice, may not get that wrong,
Yes.
Mrs., who is based in Miami, and I believe she's going to be practicing eventually as an immigration lawyer. Is that correct? All right, so I'll let you introduce yourselves further. But the purpose of this discussion here this evening is for us to discuss what we should really know about our rights. There's so much people talking about right now. And when we planned this, there was nothing in the works with what the craziness that's going on in the world right now with all these movements, and the world is burning, it seems. And quite importantly, we get a chance to discuss these elements. And also, one of the things that led me to do it is because I love finding out new things, yes. But then I always hear people say, oh, I want to be a lawyer, a doctor. And I say, what is the process like to get to where you actually are practicing as an attorney? And hopefully you can shed some light on it. So we had some additional panelists, but unfortunately, they're unable to be with us this evening. So we thank you all for being with us tonight here. All right, so in continuing our discussion, start off with you, Mr. London. Can you tell us a little bit about the qualifications, what's your practice, and, we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you, Joel. Good night, everyone. As Joel said, my name is KL London. I am originally from the island of Dominica, but I reside and practice in the island of Tortola, the British Virgin Islands. I am called to practice in Dominica and in the BVI. I hold an LEC, legal education certification to practice in the region. So that generally covers the Caribbean region for that matter. And yeah, I also hold a LLB. We call it LLB for short, but it's really a bachelor's of laws, which is needed prior to the LEC to enable me to practice.
All right.
And of course, thank you, Joel, for having me tonight.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate that. And Tamika? Just tell us a little bit about your qualifications and your background, and just to give us an idea of who you are. Oh, I am not hearing you. Oh,
You muted me for a second.
Oh, I am sorry. I apologize for that.
Yes, I can't unmute myself. Okay. So my name is Tamika Jude Alze, originally from Dominica. I have a Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology and a Bachelor of Arts in Criminal Justice. And I just finished up my Doctor of Jurisprudence degree, also known as a Juris Doctor degree. And right now it's just waiting to do the bar, basically. But in Florida, we have what is called certified legal intern status. So we actually can practice before we pass the bar under supervision of an attorney, which is basically what I'm doing now.
Okay, awesome. And we have Talia joining us. So she is doing a master's in New York in criminal justice. And can you hear us? Are you?
Yes, I can hear you all.
Okay, awesome.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you for joining us also. Can you just give a little background about what you're studying? And we're going to go on with the questions from there to just give others an idea of who you are. Okay, we have a slight lag here. Are you able to hear? Okay, I think we may have lost her. Talias? Okay, we'll connect with her in a little bit again. Okay, so we're talking about the legal profession and understanding our rights. So one of the first questions we wanted to get into is, what is the process like to get in it? Can I just one day decide I'm going to be a lawyer and go down to the courthouse and say, here's my application. Yes, I studied health and fitness, but I want to be a lawyer because I feel I can argue. So can I do that? What is the process like? And one of you pick up that and we'll go from there. Okay, Kale, I think you have to yeah.
I can, no problem. I was going to give ladies a chance to go first, but
okay.
In hindsight, Joel, I really wish it was as easy, as you just said, just pick up and go and decide you'd like to be an attorney. But it is it's a process, and it's one of the longer courses of study that you will hear a lot of persons talking about. Persons go to school and they hear about doctors and they hear about lawyers, and persons always tell them, well, those are 5-year programs and 7-year programs. So essentially what you need to do is first secure your bachelor's degree. And I'm speaking from the Caribbean perspective. I'm sure Tamika will be able to share some light on the US perspective. But once you've secured your bachelor's degree in law, you then go on to doing your LEC. So it's a total of 5 years. It's a lot of persons sometimes refer to the LEC as an equivalent to the master's degree, but we don't necessarily call it a master's degree. It's a 2-year qualifying program where you are generally exposed to the theoretical and the practical aspects of the legal practice and the legal profession in the region. And at the end of that 2-year program, you will be tested on a number of different areas, theoretical and practical. And once you are successful in these exams, you are then qualified to apply to a particular jurisdiction. And by jurisdiction, I mean a different country, because every country is governed by its own set of rules. Never mind, we are one Caribbean. So being the holder of a legal education certificate, if I wanted to, I could practice in Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana, Dominica, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, so long as I am called in that jurisdiction. So being qualified doesn't necessarily mean you can practice in the country, because you would still have to apply to that country to be accepted by the bar to legally practice in that island. So that's why I said in the beginning, I am qualified to practice in both Dominica and the British Virgin Islands. If I decide to practice in another region, I can, so long as I satisfy the country's requirements and I pay the required fees. So the more countries you are called to practice, it's the more bar fees or subscription fees, if you want to put it that way, you would have to dish out. But initially that is the process. So it's generally a 5-year process. Then you can start practicing as an attorney. If for any reason you want to branch out, like I think Joel mentioned, Talia is in a master's, you are free to do that, because you might want to specialize in a particular area, like Tamika, who is specializing in immigration law, or someone else who would like to specialize in civil or employment law. Currently, I don't want to say specialize, but I currently practice criminal law. But you're free to pursue a master's or doctorate in any of the other areas, so long as it piques your interest. So yeah, I hope that provides some sort of clarification on the Caribbean aspect.
All right. For those of you joining us, we're talking about knowing our rights as a citizen, and also we want to understand the legal system. So the question was, what is the process like to get into the legal profession? And would you like to pick up with that, Talia, since you mentioned that you were doing your master's there? Could you give us a little bit more insight as far as what was your process so far in the academic process? I think I unmuted you.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I decided to pursue my bachelor's actually in criminal justice, and I started at the St. Lucia campus. After that, they decided that I could go home to finish my bachelor's or I could come to New York. I decided to come to New York. I guess the opportunity would have been good, meet new people, network. But honestly, I had no plans of pursuing a master's degree. Only when I was there and I started networking and my professor started encouraging me, I'm like, you should do your master's. And Monroe College actually giving a grant for continuing students. So I took that opportunity and I ran with it. My initial goal plan is to study law at the University of the West Indies. A lot of people keep telling me you can stay in America, but at the end of the day, home is home. And I believe that if I do all of this, go for all this schooling and everything, I can go home to practice law instead. And yeah, that is it so far. So right now I'm pursuing my master's in criminal justice and I have a concentration in human services. I'm on my second semester and I'm estimated to complete in April of next year.
Oh, great, great, great. Awesome. And you want to add anything to that, Tamika?
Okay, so I guess I have to do the US aspect of it. I have a question for that. Can I ask a question? Okay. So, yes, so the process in the US is you get your bachelor's degree. So that's the first step. I think the key difference between, I guess, the US and the UE is that you don't need an LLB. You don't do a bachelor in laws. You can have a bachelor's degree in whatever discipline you choose. So if you want to do a bachelor's in biology, you can. If you want to be an accounting major, you can. And then you just, you apply to law schools. There's an entrance exam called the LSAT. So you take the LSAT, and based on your LSAT scores, all of the schools will offer you a merit scholarship if you have a great undergrad GPA and an LSAT score. So from there, you can either do an accelerated law degree program, which is 2 years, or you can do what I did, which was the typical 3-year program. The 3-year programs are typically more accredited than the 2-year programs because the ABA requires you to be in a classroom for a certain period of time. So the 2-year programs, basically you're gonna be in school all year round for 2 years. So you do that, and after that, after you're finished with law school, you apply for the bar. Then you have to go for a character and fitness evaluation. It's not automatic. It doesn't matter if you graduate from law school or not, top of your class. If they find anything in your record, like probably you don't pay your bills on time, you have collections, you have speeding tickets, any of those things are possibly gonna be problematic for you in actually becoming an attorney because you're held at a higher standard than everybody else. So then you apply to the bar. Then your school has to send in a certificate of good standing, basically saying that you're of good moral character and everything. They run a background check on you for the FBI, and then you take the exam. If you pass, then you can practice in the jurisdiction that you passed in, but there's something called a UBE, which basically if you pass it, you can actually transfer your score to like, I think 36 days. Whereas if you do it in a jurisdiction such as Florida, which is where I live, in Florida, if you pass the Florida bar, you can only practice in Florida because Florida does not have what is called reciprocity with other states, which means they don't allow lawyers from other states to just come and practice in Florida without passing the bar. You could be a lawyer for 20 years, it's not gonna work. You have to take the bar exam. Wow. So because of that, the reason they're doing it is they don't want attorneys from other states coming to retire in Florida, because that would mean that the market of lawyers in Florida would be so inundated that the new lawyers won't be able to find a job. So in order to deter lawyers, they decide that no matter how long you've been practicing, if you want to practice in Florida, you have to take that exam again. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the UBE jurisdiction, which will open more states to me, because once I have that passing score, then I can just wave into whatever state I want to practice in. And I'm taking the Florida bar in February. So I'm taking 2 bar exams for 2 different jurisdictions.
Wow, that's quite insightful. You guys have given us a lot there so far, and that's good. That's encouraging. So for those of you joining us, we are talking about what everyone should know about his or her rights, understanding the legal system. All right, so you talk about the different process that you've got done to get into to your profession or along the path of it. Um, can you think of maybe a class you've done so far which has been the most memorable, or one that's probably going to haunt you for the rest of your life, or maybe not necessarily, but the most memorable so far that you'd like to share with us? So at least if there are any budding attorneys, they can look forward to it. Who would like to take that one up first?
Probably I can go first this time.
Okay.
The most memorable, exciting, but challenging course I did during my undergrad was Capstone. That was the hardest.
Tell us a little bit more about, you said Capstone. So can you explain it a little bit?
Okay, well, that is the final course undergrads have to take in order to complete their degree. So, for example, I did criminology, victimology, all the different courses I did. I had to group all of that into one course and have a final paper and a final presentation. So I have to explain everything I studied over the 2 years, or sometimes for others, the 4 years in undergrad. And I had to present a topic, a subject, and I did solitary confinement.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to explain everything I learned during my undergrad in one course.
Wow.
It was challenging, but it was the most exciting because it helped me remember everything I started from my first semester up until my last one. So yes, that was it.
Wow, that sounds interesting. But
So I have 2 classes I can think of, but I would say the one class that I think broke me was contracts, because I had a Bayesian professor who, like, from the time we started, like, we started telling, like, they call you 1L, 2L, and 3L based on what year you're in. So if you're a 1L, this is the first year. So we started hearing from like 3Ls and 2Ls that, oh my God, like, you in that class, this man don't teach. And you starting to get scared because you hear that he gives C for contracts. Like, contract starts with C, so you know your grade's gonna be a C guaranteed, whatever you do. And I started in his class, and this professor, if you say the word they, if you use any type of like pronouns, he will embarrass you in class. So if you're speaking about John Jones, you can't say John Jones signed a contract and he said, he's gonna say, who is he? And start like really humiliate you in class. And that was very, I guess, intimidating for me, to the point that I did my midterm for his class, and I just bombed the midterm. Like, when I got that grade, I cried the whole night. And I didn't feel better until I got to class the next day and I found out that there was somebody who got 220. So I was like, at least somebody did worse than me. And it just kind of, it kind of taught me something. In life, when you fail, that failure doesn't necessarily mean that you're worse off, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't recover. Because I thought at that point that I had failed that class. But when I heard that other people did worse, I was like, okay, cool, I got this. And I was able to get a really good grade in class. So that class kind of haunted me because it kind of traumatized me. But it actually taught me a very valuable lesson that I can do whatever I put my mind to.
Alrighty. And Mr. Landon? Okay, I think you muted yourself again. Are you there?
Yes. I won't attempt to discuss which class was hardest, so I hate it most, because it will probably cover 90% of the courses that I did. Persons always get surprised when I tell them I don't like reading, because they always feel like if you're a lawyer, you're supposed to love reading. Truth be told, I'm not a fan of it. So a lot of those courses, I really just had to push myself. But what I can tell you is the course that I would consider most memorable was International Human Rights, because that really gave me an opportunity to understand the difficulties that human beings face outside of the Caribbean region, because so many times our perspectives are so restricted to that of our region or to that of North America. We don't realize or appreciate the atrocities that are occurring in South America or in other Middle Eastern countries. Part of that course was what we call international mooting. So it's basically a debate. For the best reference I could draw is that of how to get away with murder. Right now, this episode is very popular with Annalise Keating being before the Supreme Court, and she's making her case and the judges are throwing questions at her. So that's what mooting is like. You go before the judges and you're arguing your case and they're sending questions at you left, right, and center. You have to remain committed. You cannot get frustrated. You cannot get overwhelmed. And I had the opportunity to do that in Washington. And it was before various judges of different cultural backgrounds, different ethnicities. So it was a really challenging experience because, you know, this little Dominican boy is here arguing a case about persons in Peru, and you're quoting international legislation, and you have an opportunity of actually working with judges who sat on real life cases that dealt with like international crime and mass genocide, and you really had to argue your point. So I think that was one of the most memorable courses that I did, because to this day, I still have a passion for human rights. And if I do decide to pursue a master's degree, it will definitely be in that direction, something to do with human rights, something to do with constitutional law and you know, that particular area. Because I feel like, yes, it's all well and good to be an attorney, and most persons say, I want to be an attorney because I want to help people. But at the end of the day, that help is usually so limited based on the amount of money that we are able to make at the time. Because generally you come into the profession wanting to help, and then you start making money. And sometimes you forget that, you know, initially I came here to help people. And I think international human rights, it's up to this day, we see what's going on in the US right now. When I see things like that happening, it continues to remind me of what my passion is and where my interests lie. So international human rights, most memorable course. I remember crying a few times because my lecturer was not satisfied with our work, so he sent us back to the drawing board. But it was also the most rewarding experience, and I would do it again in a heartbeat.
I think we've all had those moments in school where we had to put down some tears in order to get rewards. So that's great. Now I want to take it a little bit further here, because we are talking about understanding the system. So as we jump into that, the question I would ask is how easy it is, or maybe not, I should use the word easy, but how much flexibility does your degree give within the law profession? So for example, each of you mentioned you studied a different part of it, or you were specified in a certain way. Can you go between different? Because most times when we think about a lawyer, people probably just think about the defense attorney, where, okay, this person is arguing in court, but maybe for the most of us may not be aware that the vast arena that the profession plays a part in. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, and how much flexibility that someone can have within the profession in their practice? Who's starting us off?
Okay, so it's very flexible. For example, in the US, you get first of all, you can't specialize in a field. You can primarily practice in a field, but they don't really recognize you as a specialist unless you do like a specific course to specialize as an attorney in that field, basically. But you can practice whatever you like. And in schools, they give you the option. So you take the basic core courses, which will be contracts, real property, torts, civil procedure, constitutional law, professional responsibility. After those courses, you get to choose. Do I want to do immigration law? Do I want to learn entertainment law? Like I did a course in entertainment law. Do I want to do commercial law? Do I want to do business law? So basically you have a choice to choose different areas of law that you know you're interested in. And we have what is called the collaborative clinic at my school, where we have a family law clinic, an immigration clinic, and a juvenile defense clinic. and the bankruptcy clinic. So basically you can choose to do those clinics, and with those clinics, you actually get to interact with real clients. You represent them in court, you write your briefs, and you do that. So in so doing, you get the exposure in those fields, and you decide, okay, for me, it was through the immigration clinic that I was like, okay, immigration is really what I want to do. You know, when you have to go to court and defend this person who's trying to get asylum to remain in the country, it was just so exciting. So it's really flexible. And if I decide maybe after I do the bar exam, hey, I want to do criminal law, I can just do criminal law. There's no extra course that I need to do. There's no extra, you know, qualifications I need to do. If I'm a solo practitioner, I just need to partner up with an attorney that has already been practicing that type of law so that I can learn. I can try to do it on my own, but then it doesn't really make much sense if you do it that way.
Kalia, you want to add to that?
No, not yet.
Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. I think Tamika explained that one pretty good. So we're going to move on to the next question, which is in relation to the legal system throughout the region as far as the Caribbean is concerned, and North America and the rest of the world. How similar or how different are they as far as if somebody wants to practice between that? You did mention a little bit about that in the beginning. However, I'm going to take it a step further in relation to human rights and the basic rights every human has. And I believe it's the UN Charter of, now I'm going to show my education here, but I forgot the date, so I'm going to leave that alone. I was going to say it was 89, or you guys are the legal professionals, help me out here. Where it states the basic rights of every human. How does that play a part into the profession and the different ways the legal system is throughout the world? Gail, you want to start us off on that one?
Okay. I'm not sure. I'm waiting for you to tell me. Yeah, the UN Charter on Human Rights. The thing is, most countries have ratified or has signed on to the Charter, and you will see that reflected in the various constitutions. So it's the freedom of life, freedom to liberty, rights to assemble, right to privacy, and all of that. So generally, in that sense, we are quite similar to the US system. And I mean the UK system, because as most persons know, majority of the islands in the Caribbean were all British colonies, you know, stemming from slavery and all of that. And our legal system is something that we kept from the UK. So a lot of our laws are very similar to the laws of England. US, on the other hand, you will find, you know, varying differences, but the general principles of law would remain the same. In any event, a person who is qualified to practice in the Caribbean cannot up and go and try to practice in. And similarly, a person who in the US, with all of their qualifications, would have to come down here and do it quite over, because a lot of things differ in the way that we deal with different principles, different documents, you know, different ideas, different rules of governance. So you rarely ever find a Caribbean attorney jump in and go to the US unless there is some long-term plan to reside in the US. It isn't the case where I can say, okay, I want to be able to practice in Guyana, Antigua, and BVI, so I can, you know, interchange as I please. You can do that, but you cannot do Trinidad and Miami or New York and then back down to, you know, Jamaica, unless you really decide to put in the work and try to get qualified. So in terms of similarities, the general principles are pretty much the same. Your general human rights, your general freedoms, but when it comes down nitty-gritty of it, as Tamika was saying, you know, I think they're a bit more strict for certain things over in the US, because, you know, checking for stuff like parking tickets and if you have outstanding this and outstanding that, it's not as strict down in the region, and that's just on the basis of qualification, the basis of law. For instance, one quick example, a lot of persons watch
TV shows, and they would see attorneys go into the courtroom, and they would argue that the evidence was obtained illegally, and they would ask the judge to have it thrown out, with some interlude, and the judge would say, yes, this is thrown out, you are free to go because the only piece of evidence against you was obtained illegally and it's thrown out. In the region, we don't have that. In the region, even if the evidence was obtained illegally, it can still be admitted into evidence, providing that you can establish certain things.
Oh, wow.
So, slight differences, but in principles.
Okay, for a second you cut off. All right, you're back. Okay. All right, that's interesting there in relation to that. You brought up actually a question that I have listed here. So maybe I'll just take that question right away and just go straight into it. Are there any similarities between what you do in the real profession, if I say use the word real loosely, and your TV attorney, or is that really fictional?
Okay. So depending on the show you're watching, like How to Get Away with Murder, I can say at least that it's a lot, like if you have a good writer, they will try to at least make it realistic. But a lot of the things you see on TV with these lawyers, objection, and whatever the person says, not even objectionable. Like you can't say objection because you don't like the question. But it looks nice on TV to see the lawyer jumping up and screaming objection and whatever. So there are similarities, but honestly, in the real world, it doesn't really work that way. And the law up here is very intricate. So yes, sometimes you can get evidence in on a technicality, but as KL just said, once it's fruit of the poisonous tree, if you found, let's say you find cocaine in my car, but it was the result of an illegal search, if that's the only reason you stopped me and that's what I'm charged with, then you can't really convict me because we don't have any evidence.
Interesting.
And that would not happen here. You would convict here. You would be convicted.
Okay, so we've seen some differences right there. Okay, that makes sense there.
So add to what Rebecca just said, if I may, Joel.
Yeah, go right ahead.
I stopped watching the show Suits because it really annoyed me.
Yeah.
Because they were really giving the impression that this is the illegal practice. Like you get this $3 million suit and you go and you threaten a client or you threaten a witness, and suddenly they have this affidavit pulling out from their bag and presenting to the court. No, that's not how it works.
Oh.
A lot of the things that it's a lot of shortcuts. So you just show up in court and you suddenly have this new witness that only became available last night with all of this incriminating information that has not been close to the other side, and they just walk into the courtroom and they take no.
It doesn't work that way, does it?
It doesn't. As a matter of fact, they call that trial by ambush, and it no longer occurs in the Caribbean. So that simply means whatever I'm going to use in court, the lawyer on the other side must have prior knowledge of it prior to the day. I cannot walk in on the day and just decide I'm introducing evidence. The court would not allow it. The court would pause the matter, give you an opportunity to go back, review the new evidence, and then come back and decide if it should be admitted. So TV show is, TV shows. It's really not reality.
And that's one of the similarities between the systems in terms of you have to actually, if you don't, it's a Brady violation. If you don't disclose evidence. However, if it's something that you could have discovered through your investigation or something that you could have found out some other way that wasn't so far off, or if that's, let's say they have witnesses against you, right? And you as the attorney did not take the time to interview everybody to see, okay, the government interviewed this person, what did they say? If you didn't look into that and on the day they have a surprise witness, that's on you. The judge is gonna tell you that's yours. But if it's something that is so incriminating that it has to be, let's say it's something that can prove the person is innocent, they will sometimes grant you extra time. Or if the judge, if it's your habit to do that, it's your habit to try to surprise people, then the judge may just tell you, well, that's too bad. They won't even give you time to evaluate it. They will just tell you it's staying out.
Interesting. Now, what is the biggest eye-opener? We'll go to you first, Talia, that you found when you entered into the profession versus when you were in high school saying that, hey, I want to be a lawyer, or in college, or whatever level you decided to take that track. Or maybe it could have been in primary school, you say, I want to be a lawyer. What was the biggest eye-opener for you when you got into the profession?
Honestly, when I came to America and I started learning about the criminal justice system here, and I saw how different it is from back home, that was just in general an eye-opener. Just the way that they have programs for juvenile delinquents, and we don't even have that home. Like that was one where I was really disturbed. Like, what are we doing? What are we doing back home? So like in general, everything was eye-opening for me. But what that interests me right now is what KL said. That's in the Caribbean. They don't like look at evidence that was found illegally, quote unquote. Like it can be admitted into court. And yeah, that is all I learned, that there are certain evidence that can't be admitted. So yeah, I am sitting thinking I'm learning all of this. And when I do decide to go into law school back home, I have to change my entire mindset because it's different. Some things are different. What I'm learning here, it might not be the same thing back home. So, yep. Generally, it's just eye-opening.
Interesting. What about you, Tamika?
I think everything I'm talking about, I'm trying not to talk about immigration, but I think one of the biggest eye-openers for me was, at first I thought, you want to be a lawyer, okay, you go to law school, you learn to argue, you're not taught to argue. Like you learn, like basically it's a lot of reading, a lot of critical thinking, and one of the hardest things was having to read those old English cases because the US system is based on common law. So a lot of it is those judges using language, and you have to really sit down sometimes and probably go on Google to try to figure out what they're trying to say, because the sentence doesn't make any sense. The way it's written doesn't make sense, but you have to try to decipher what they're trying to say, almost like trying to read Greek, So that was one of the eye-openers for me, because I didn't understand that I would have had to go that far to learn the law, to learn all those things that basically don't even apply today, because you read the entire case and then at the end they're telling you reversed. So you just have a whole case that doesn't even matter.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I don't know if Kayla can relate.
Your biggest eye-opener, Kale?
There's a statement our lecturers said to us in law school that I never understood until I got into practice. It says the law is a jealous mistress. So the biggest, which means that you either choose the law or you choose a social life, family, all of that. And I didn't believe it. I kept saying to myself, nah, man, I can't do it. I can multitask. I can balance my time. But the biggest eye-opener for me was when I realized that you will never get to a point in practice where you have arrived. Because the law is continuously evolving. Like Tamika said, somebody can have new justifications for that reversal, and you now have to go and learn it. So you'll never be at a point where you can say, I know the law, or I am an expert in this, because the law continues to evolve, and you have to continue reading, you have to continue upgrading your knowledge bank. And I think that was the biggest, I was like a wow moment for me, that I have to really, really continue studying, period. So it's like the studying will never end.
Nope.
The studying might become easier because you might know, how to navigate your way around information a bit better, but the studying and the reading and the learning will never end. And I think that was the biggest eye-opener for me.
Now I'm going to jump into another question here in relation to how the law is seen in society, how it affects in society in ways that we will not know. For example, it's needed for a variety of things in society. But can you give an example of where we may not realize the importance of the law, in defending somebody's rights, something that's necessarily non-criminal. Because most times we think of a criminal, somebody gets arrested, they go to court, but not something that's in that perspective. Can you give us where the law is very important and it may defend our rights and we may not even be aware of it?
So, the criminal lawyer should go last, right?
Yep, he won't talk about criminals. You can go, Kale.
Because now I have to think outside of criminal.
Outside being a criminal lawyer.
I don't know.
Off the top of my head, something that's very simple, it's like probate law. Sometimes you have all of these assets and you have family members who you weren't necessarily on the best of terms with, and for whatever reason you're probably not able to execute a will before your death, or probably you try to execute a will but it does not it is not based on legal standard, so obviously it becomes null and void. What the law does is it is able to, one, protect your assets in such a way that different persons cannot just come and claim whatever they want or claim whatever they feel they are entitled to. Especially if you are a spouse, or especially if you are a daughter or a son, and your mother-in-law probably never liked you, or your father-in-law probably never liked you. The law creates an avenue to ensure that the person's assets are distributed in a free and a fair way. So I think that's one right off the top of your head, that even when you have gone under the law is still ensuring that your assets are not just up for free or for, anyone to come and take and squander. And it's something I think we don't really appreciate, because a lot of persons, believe it or not, don't do wills. I'm not sure if it's because we are afraid of confronting death or if it depresses us, but quite a lot of persons don't do wills, or you feel you won't die young. And then you end up dying and you leave quite a lot of assets unspoken for. So the law will find a way to ensure that those assets are divided amongst your family, and it goes down the line.
All right, that's a really great example there. And so it makes everybody think about, whoa, let me put my stuff in order, because we never know what's going to happen when or how. What about you, Talia? Can you pick up on that or give another example?
Excuse me, what did you say? Sorry.
Can you add to what he said or give a different example in relation to how the law might be, we may not realize the importance of it in defending our rights, something that's non-criminal?
Honestly, I don't think I have much knowledge on that yet.
Okay.
And I don't want to say anything that might be wrong. So I will leave it to the professionals.
Okay.
To add to what Kale is saying, I guess a very important part of it, I guess, and I know probate law in the Caribbean is obviously different from in the States. However, the most complicated part, and I think what people don't realize is, let's say I live in Florida, right? I could have a valid will in Florida. I moved to Maryland. Maryland law may not recognize that will, because whatever I did for that will does not fit the requirements of that jurisdiction. So you could have a valid will in Florida, but you move to another state and that will is null and void, and you don't even know that. Now, the wills actually protect the rights of even your children. You can't write a will that's specific. You can't, in Florida, you can't write an exclusionary will. So basically you can say to all my children except Kale, when you die, the court is gonna go back. If you have 4 children, the 4 children are gonna get what goes to them, and your wife is gonna get what goes to your wife. In some jurisdictions, when you die, everything goes to your spouse. And then the spouse, because they're alive, when they die, then it goes to the children. So it's a lot of intricacies that people don't even realize exist, but it's also the law's way of basically assuring equitable distribution. Just like in divorce, it's the same thing. The court has certain rules that, yes, okay, you may think you divorced the lady and you have okay, I'm done with you. No. Anything you acquire during that marriage, including debt, Any student loans your wife take while you're married, guess what? You divorce her, half of those loans is yours. Go with it. Have fun. So it also protects the wife, because imagine you go studying for a career, and then when you're done with school, whatever, this man tried to leave you with $200,000 in loans after you did all of that to try to support your family. So the law will actually protect you in that it would say anything you acquire during that marriage is split in half, assets as well as liabilities.
I heard of a case where it was in the U.S. where someone had passed away and he had a significant amount of money, but in his will he left for his spouse. I'm not sure if it was it was common law or if they were married, but he left for his, I'll use the word spouse loosely, where she got the amount of money, but she got it in increments as much as $300 a month.
Yes, you
Now,
can.
is that possible? And where the court cannot do anything but give her the $300, even though he had like 10 million, she get only $300 a month.
It is possible if that's what the directive is. If he put it in a trust, like let's say you have a frivolous child, you know you're going, if you die, you want them to get the fortune. If you know that that child is very bad at managing money, you can say, okay, you need to get $100 a week type thing. So you can dictate that, how it's to be distributed. If she's trying to remove it, then she's gonna probably try to go to court, but the burden to prove why you should be it doesn't matter how much money it is, but why do you need more than 300? The court is not just going to dishonor the dead just because you feel like you deserve to get more at one time. So you have to have like legit reasons for everything.
If I might just drink from Tamika's perspective a bit, I know, Joel, you made mention of a spouse, and Tamika's reference was for a child. You've been told some children are very frivolous and they'll want to squander parents' money. But the court will also look at, reasonableness. Because if you leave your spouse and you go with all the expenses, the children to take care of, the house to keep up, you're not going to give her $300 a month. So obviously, her best option would be to go back to the court and ask them to look at the reasonability of the clause and to see if there are any reasons provided by the deceased as to why he wanted to give her $300. Because if the court finds it was just out of spite, the court might not want to uphold that will. But if someone had a will, it can be shown why it is that he decided he was only given 300, intervals of 300, then the court might be a bit more reluctant to interfere. Because as Tamika said, it's your money, you have the right to assign it as you please. But the court will also look at reasonableness. So the court will not allow you to give your quote-unquote outside woman 90% of the money and your spouse gets 10. Of course, that will be challenged in court. So while you have the freedom to do as you please, the court continues to possess what we call an inherent jurisdiction. And I think that ideally, Joel, sums up the idea of how the court protects you. There is something called an inherent jurisdiction to ensure that justice is. It's in the criminal law, it's in civil law, it's in contract law, it's in employment law. So in other words, there are times when there might be no law speaking to it, no case speaking to it. The court will do what they call invoke the inherent jurisdiction to apply justice in a circumstance. And if it seems to be extremely unjust or extremely unfair in all the circumstances, to give the lady $300 and you're a millionaire. And the other thing is, usually when you die, your spouse, or even when you divorce, they're expecting that the person will continue to live the lifestyle that they have become used to. So they could not have been living like a billionaire all along, and suddenly you're giving them $300. Time you go to the salon, you get your nails done, you buy a bag, you buy a shoe, money is done. So that's one of the ways
from my knowledge of it, it was done in spite. So where that was done, but so I was wondering about that, whether that could be reversed.
The thing is, if she makes, but that's another thing, Kale, that's another factor. If you yourself have money, let's say you yourself are a billionaire and he give you $300 a month, you think the court gonna worry with you that you want more? So they call it the totality of the circumstances. So they take everything into consideration. As he said, is it reasonable? And also, is it, do you need it, basically?
All right, let's jump on a different train here. But just before we do, I noticed Natalie had asked a question about when Tamika was speaking, and she said about studying in the US, how different, no, it was Talia, sorry, in relation to studying in the US. And the question she asked here says that in light of the, does it make any sense now to study in the US if one plans to practice in the Caribbean? Can we deal with this topic here if you, before we go on? Or can you convert, or is there an exam you can take where you can practice both, or how does that work?
Okay, I would say no if you plan to practice primarily in the Caribbean. If you do not plan to practice in the US, don't waste your time. However, and I plan on doing it, the 2-year course that they do in law school, if you're already a barred attorney in another jurisdiction in the States or wherever, you can do, I think it's a 6-month conversion course in Jamaica. So you do that 6-month course and you're able to practice in the Caribbean. However, if you don't want to practice in the States, I really don't see why you would waste the money, because law school is expensive. And basically the knowledge you learn from the US, you're gonna have to relearn things for the Caribbean jurisdiction, because I don't know, Kale might know the answer to that, but when I was looking into UWI, I was told that you can only go into the law exam if you get an LLB first. Is that correct? Or can you use any bachelor's at UWI?
No, you need the LLB.
Okay, so basically you just wasted 4 years or 2 years doing a bachelor's that is not going to benefit you in any way, because you still have to do another bachelor's at UWI, which is the LLB, and then go to law school. So all the time you're spending doing a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, when it goes down to the Caribbean, it doesn't mean anything to you in terms of law school. It's different for the US in that if you get a bachelor's at UWI, you can come to the States and go to law school because you have a bachelor's degree if, the school is accredited, blah, blah, blah. But to do a bachelor's degree, that's basically worthless when it comes to your intended career. I feel like that's a step that you should just, unless it's something you're passionate about, if you really want to be a lawyer, you should just go straight to UWI, get that LLB, and get that out in 5 years, because a bachelor's is 4 years. Plus, if you decide to do any other degree, that's probably like the same 5 years. You already wasted it when you could have been a lawyer at the end of that 5 years. So that's my take on it. I don't know how KL feels.
Well, I have friends who are called in Jamaica are currently practicing in New York. So it is possible, because I think it is easier for you to study in the region and then try to branch out into the US than for you to study in the US and try to come and get qualified in the region. Because what happens is when you have your LLB here, go over to the US and you study for the thereby exams. If it's Brooklyn, New York. Sorry?
You have to do the LLM, the present law, in order to do the law exam. Okay.
Right. Okay. So I know persons who've done that, and at the end of the day, they can practice in the US and here in the region. So it is possible, but like Tamika is saying, you just have to be willing, I guess, to spend a little more time than the average attorney who would have either done US law or Caribbean law. So it's possible.
Well, the bright side to look at, you would just have more under your belt as far as information.
Right.
If you decide to do the long process to get there.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the rights of minority groups. All right. Now, when we talk about minority groups, that term can sometimes be used very loosely. So first of all, I would like to define what is a minority group. And then also the second part of the question is, are there more or less rights, if I can phrase it that way, to minority groups such as Indigenous Indians or any other minority groups that they are?
I wouldn't say. The first part of that question, because I was about to jump on the second part. I don't want to miss the first part. Can you just repeat the first part for me, Joel?
The first part is basically understanding what is a minority group. So the rights of the minority group. So what constitutes a minority group? How do we put it under an umbrella, say this is a minority group? How do we
Right.
define a minority group?
Without getting too technical, and obviously, I'm sure there will be way better definitions on what I'm about to give, but probably in the best layman's term to put it, a minority group is a group of persons, quote unquote, in a minority, not as much in a particular society. So it could be disabled people because, you know, there are more quote unquote abled bodies than there are disabled persons. It could be, like you said, indigenous people. For example, in Dominica and St. Vincent, we have a few Kalinagos, we have a few, gosh, I don't want to say the A word. I know it, it's Kalinagos and Tianos, right? So they could be considered a minority group. In certain places, you would have Blacks as being a minority group because they are probably in a society where majority of the population are white folks and you have Black persons. You might have persons employed in a particular area, like probably construction workers as being a minority group because the society might be more tourism focused or agriculture focused. So it really depends on the context in which you are looking at it. Now, what governments have been trying to do and what is extremely commendable is that they try to ensure that the rights of these groups are protected, which shouldn't have to be, because you would like to think as a person, you would have the equal right to that person in the minority group. But when you think of cases, for example, the disabled persons, when you have to pass special legislation to ensure that they can get a parking space at a mall, to ensure that your buildings have proper ramps, that their wheelchairs can be pushed up, to ensure that if you have toilet facilities, one of the bathrooms must be fitted in such a way to accommodate someone with a disability. That's basically what we're talking about when we're talking about legislating or putting laws in place to protect minorities. Putting laws in place to ensure that there will never be a time where a Kainago person can no longer build on their property or grow crops on their property because the popular or the more wealthy person stayed and opened some multi-million-dollar mall and, you know, would have taken up their lands, bought up the lands. So it's basically putting laws in place to protect their rights. Some persons just feel that you end up giving them more rights than us. For example, we all know about this whole the LGBT community, and when it just came about, there was this issue about, you know, it seems like they're having more rights because in the US, this person was sued for refusing to bake a cake. I think that was one of the most controversial examples. This couple was sued because they did not want to bake a wedding cake for a LGBT couple, and the couple was successful. Because what the law was saying is if they want a cake, you have to bake the cake for them like you would have baked the cake for any other couple. And a lot of persons went up in arms because they're saying you're now forcing ideologies on different sets of people and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's really just a matter of ensuring that minority groups are treated just as fairly as the majority. Best way to put it. Good example right now is what is happening in the US. The Black should not be treated any differently from any other ethnicity. Muslims should not be treated any other way. Indians should not be treated any other way. So it's important as a region and also as individuals that we understand that minority groups require special attention because it is very easy for us to just overlook them. Very easy for us to, you know, forget what it takes to probably have to be wheeled into a theater when you're so used to just walking into the theater, getting your popcorn, and going to go have a seat. So I hope that answers the question somewhat.
Okay. Tally, on the second part of it, you want to pick up there with the is there less or more rights? Okay, I think I lost her there. She'll connect back. Tamika, you want to pick up there?
People see it as more rights, especially in the US, but it's not a matter of minority groups having more rights. It's more a matter of equality. That's why they're under the Equal Protection Clause. It just means that, for example, in Florida, Florida has its own constitution. Some states have their own constitution, their own flag, and all of that. But there was a clause in the constitution that prohibited people ineligible for American citizenship from owning property. So you couldn't own property in Florida if you were ineligible for citizenship. So basically, if you have a green card, yes, but if you're here as a F1 student, you can't own any property, not even a car. You can't own any property at all, as long as you don't have a path to citizenship. And that was removed to provide protection for people who come to the country who don't have a right to citizenship but reside in the state. So in terms of the whole kick situation, it was a matter of ensuring that everybody's on the same footing. Nobody is treated differently because of, their color of their skin or anything. So that's why, you had the protecting voting, the right to vote as a right, because everybody needs to vote, but they don't specifically say, well, minorities can vote. Indians, this person can vote. No, it's like everybody can vote. So you're on equal footing. It seems like you give them more rights, but it's not really more rights. They're just exercising the rights that were already afforded to them, basically. So in terms of the people who decided they wanted to marry, the men who wanted to marry men and women who wanted to marry women, it's a matter of there's a right to marriage. The right to marriage cannot be infringed based on who you decide to marry, because it says you have a right to marry. So it's not really that you give them more rights than they had before. It's just a matter of recognizing rights that were already afforded to them that were being infringed upon, basically.
That makes sense in relation to that. Now, in discussing this topic, we must talk about what's going on in the world right now. There's a great buzz in relation to, obviously, the death of, I'm forgetting his name, Floyd, right? And throughout the US and the world, a lot of cities are burning, a lot of riots are going on. And from a legal perspective, this question is coming to you. Legally, how does the law balance between maintaining order and getting justice for this person, or justice for any crimes committed? I could put it that way.
Can you repeat the question? I feel like I'm Queen Show.
How does the law balance between maintaining order and getting justice for crimes committed in a time when tempers are hot and a lot of hate is being spewed?
Kelly, you want to go first? Is he frozen?
Yeah. Well, okay, for a second.
Me.
Is he frozen?
Are you still there? Already.
Sorry. Can you?
We're saying, how do we find a balance between maintaining?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Justice.
Yes. We can hear you now.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. It's something I battled with. It's a question that I battled with over the weekend, actually, with another attorney friend of mine. Because, Joel, the issue is that persons feel like the law is not protecting them. So to answer a question like that, would have to, first of all, presume that the law works as it should, and then we can now see how we can use the law to protect the interests of, you know, what's going on, of the persons of what's going on right now. The problem is persons find or feel that the law is not protecting them. One of the things I asked, and a lot of persons, you know, differed with me on that in helping. One person said, you know, fighting for someone said, at this point, you cannot take a logical or a legal approach to things, because the reality of the matter is that the law is being disregarded when it comes to a certain class of people. So that very law that is...
Okay, I think we're missing part of your speech there.
Obviously, it cannot be effective in protecting or so it's something that I don't particularly have an answer for. Are you hear me now?
You were choppy. The part we got was something you don't have an answer for. But before you said that, you said something, I didn't quite get everything you said there.
So just quickly to recap, I said the problem is right now, persons feel like law is not protecting them as it should. So how can we ask a question concerning how the law can either maintain or address the situation that's happening now in the US? What we can hope for is that persons who are in authority equally amongst all persons. In helping, how is violence helping? And you would know the law should be that someone was murdered, an investigation ensued,
okay, we're having a little problem getting it.
And then justice happens at the end. But what seems to be happening right now is that we're jumping. Any better now?
A little bit. We get with the justice. You were doing well, and then suddenly you near the end there you started cutting off again.
One more time. In conclusion, I was just saying, right now we have a situation where you're supposed to have a murder happens or an offense happens. Yes. An investigation ensues. At the end of the investigation, justice happens. Justice means the person either is let free because the evidence isn't against them, or the person is punished because the evidence is against them. Right yes. Now, what we have is a murder happens and we've jumped to retaliation. We've forgotten part about, okay, let us do the proper investigations. Let us use the evidence that is available. It seems as if that we are jumping that part. And this is why we are in a situation right now where the law seems broken. Because what is supposed to be helping and protecting people, what persons are supposed to be able to do is say, okay, let me go back and sit down and I can't wait to see how that trial goes. I can't wait to see what witnesses they come up with. I can't wait to see what they have to say about the autopsy report. But it doesn't seem like that is what is being available. So the law isn't doing what it is supposed to do right now. And that's why persons have a blatant disregard for it. So you have looting, you have retaliation, you have assaults, and all of that is happening. And a lot of us will sit back behind our screens and we'll tell ourselves, well, you know, you can't fight fire with fire, and two wrongs don't make a right, and all of this and all of that and all of that. But at the end of the day, this system that is supposed to ensure that you don't fight fire with fire is failing you. So we're at a point where I'm not sure what is going to happen in the next coming days, because as it stands, the law should be doing more. But we can just wait and see.
Alrighty. What's your input to that, Tamika?
It's a loaded question. Like,
so looking at the balance between, basically looking at the balance between the law and getting justice committed. How do you maintain that balance?
I would say that there's a lot of systematic racism in America, and because of the way the system is set up, a lot of things are based on discretion, and discretion is a word that they love, because if it's to my discretion whether I charge you with murder or manslaughter, and I feel like, you know, you were right to do whatever you did, and I charge you with manslaughter, nobody can tell me what to charge you with. Like, the judge can't say you need to charge this person for a higher crime. No. So they decide what they're going to prosecute the person for. And oftentimes, because of how the system is set up, Black people often do not get a fair shake at things, per se. Like, for example, you're supposed to have a jury of your peers, right? Imagine you're a Black man, black man living in a predominantly white neighborhood or white part of the country. You really think you're gonna get a jury of your peers? You're not. You're gonna get a jury of, because the jury pool is kind of random. So basically, you're gonna get a pool of people who don't look like you, who are not classified as your peers. And yes, maybe your attorney can try to get a change of venue and whatever, but it's just that the way it's set up, it's rigged against Black people in a way that's strange. Because, for example, they say, you know, we have so many Black people in jail, we have this, we have that. Look at the whole issue with Floyd. I know some people say, had he been another race, if XYZ would have happened. My thing is, even the officers who were assisting in that arrest, they did not protect and serve. Because if you see something like that happening and you're right there, then, you know, you step in. But guess what? Right now, they are still, like, the prosecutor doesn't feel like they have any type of culpability because they still haven't been charged. Now, it could be that they're trying to gather more evidence before they decide how to charge them. But a lot of charging and stuff in the US is with bureaucracy. So somebody can, like, probably a senator could call your office, because I know somebody who is a AUSA, assistant state US attorney. And she will say that there have been times where cases come across her desk and she gets that call from the mayor, like, hey, this one has to go, like, drop the case. And sometimes you don't have a choice but to drop the case. So the law is intended to protect you, but it kind of seems like certain classes of people have more protection than others. And it's because of the fact that minorities, especially minorities in terms of race, are seen as lower class citizens and are treated as such. And because we have a president who endorses that school of thought, it's even harder to get, you know, justice for people. And right now, with all the unrest going on, yes, they should. I mean, the police right now are using a lot of discretion, because technically they can arrest a lot of the people doing all of these things, but it's going to escalate the situation. So they're put in a position where they cannot maintain law and order, because in so doing, they're going to cause more disorder. So it's just a mess right now. And I'm not really sure how it's going to get resolved. But I will say the system is rigged.
So I'm trying to understand what you both said, and I'm not sure I get a complete answer there. So
I don't think there's a complete answer to that. That's the difficulty, because, you know, the situation is very ticklish right now. Generally, law is supposed to protect you. Law is supposed to provide you with some sort of assurance. X is done, Y shall be the result. But we are at a situation right now where X is being done, and there are questions as to whether Y will be the result. So, like I said, we can hope, we can trust that, you know, common sense and fairness and justice will prevail, and the law will do what it was meant to do, especially with the fact that so many persons are taking up arms. So I haven't given up yet on the justice system. I haven't given up on the intention of law and legal precepts and principles. I am just hoping that the persons in authority will allow justice to prevail as it should. And that's, I think that's the best way to answer that question, because it would be unfair to answer it in any other way, having regard to what is going on right now.
Yeah, because the reason why I asked this question is because I am looking at all the turmoil that's going on, and I'm saying, okay, should the police or should the legal system, if I can use it loosely in that sense, step in, or should they pull back? Or, you know, where is that balance? And that is the confusing factor there, because there is a great cause, and you want people to protest a great cause. But then to some extent, do you really want people this, and whatever fraction it is of the protesters, destroying the community? So, but then you go in and then you're going to meet a front between something that might boil into more than it is. So where do you find the balance there? So that's, I think, is probably a difficult one to any mayor or governor to deal with, I'm sure, in his or her state.
Yes.
Yeah. If the answer was easy, I'm sure they would have done it by now. We've been having protests for a couple of days now, Joel, and we have seen a definitive action by the authorities as yet to either quell the because truth be told, you have law enforcement officers joining the protests.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. I've
There's
seen.
just no way to go around this. You cannot send in armed forces because you might escalate the situation to a civil war. You cannot turn a blind eye because the law still has to protect the innocent people, the business owners, person's property. So you're right now. Lady Justice is really balancing right now. You know that.
Yes.
What I'm saying, they can't. Like,
Did
I
you
feel
see the? I'm sorry, I interrupted you there.
I was just saying, I feel like it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't. Regardless of what they do now, short of doing, okay. Now the protests are mainly because there's no justice for Floyd as yet. If the state decides to charge the officers like people are calling for, initiate speedy trial, set a date, have all of those things done, that is what I think is going to quell the violence and stuff going on now. Absent of that, they're going to start a war, because the moment, and that's why the police officers, if you look at videos, they're just forming a wall. They're not touching people, they're not tear gassing, they're not sending you home. They will stay outside of these people until 3 a.m. in the morning without moving. Because right now they cannot afford to escalate things, because the first person who dies, the first Black person who dies is going to cause a revolution of Black people, and they don't want that. See, back then in the civil rights movement, they had that day where they were spraying people down with hoses, like the fire hose, spraying Black people like roaches. And that caused like a big uprising, and they don't want that again. So they're in a situation of, you know, we still have to satisfy our constituents, but we cannot do anything right now because anything we do is gonna get us stuck. So right now it's at a standstill, and I don't think that, and people keep saying no justice, no peace, no justice, no peace. So unless people feel like we are starting to get justice, unless the president comes and he condemns it, he hasn't condemned the violence, but he said when they start looting, we start shooting. So that should tell you where he stands on the matter. But unless they say, okay, we're going to enact rules and procedures in the police department, we're going to retrain all police officers across the country, we're going to have more accountability. Unless they do things like that, the violence isn't going to stop. So it's not a matter of, you know, sending the protesters home or anything, but they need to take affirmative steps to basically calm people down. And until they do that, this is going to exist, and it's going to get worse, because even today, more and more states, people are starting to riot. People are starting to just, you know, act like slaves who really wanted to be free.
Interesting perspective there, because did you see the one news article where the business owner was on his property and he shot someone who was attempting to loot or either was vandalizing the property? From a legal perspective, can he be defended, or would he be charged?
He shot somebody who was looting?
Was attempting to loot his property.
Man, it's a question of, necessity, did he use necessary force? If it's a state, what state was it?
I am not sure off the top of my head.
If it's a stand your ground state, chances are he may get away with it. In Florida, if I'm sitting here right now and I see an intruder entering through my window, as long as they're in the house, I can shoot them. And that's the law. But if the person is outside attempting to come in and you shoot them, then that's a whole different ballgame. So it really, the answer to almost every legal question is it depends.
I guess every state, every situation kind of makes its own, figures out its own self then.
Yeah, every
Yeah.
state makes its own rules, basically.
Okay. Now, not regressing, but as far as in relation to education and in relation to understanding the legal system, it seems like I also studied in the US, high school and university. So, and during my high school year, I learned the US Constitution and everything. Do you feel to some extent this should be applied to the Caribbean region, where people should be more aware of what goes on in the Constitution to help different people make more informative choices? Or you think that might be too much at that point?
Yeah, I definitely think 100%, Joel, that we should introduce that into our schools because a lot of us perish for a lack of knowledge.
Uh-huh.
Any Caribbean person you talk to, if you ask them what do they think their legal rights are, most of them will tell you, when they arrest me, I have the rights to call a lawyer. And that might be their extent of their knowledge on the Constitution.
Uh-huh.
Or their, so I think it would be quite useful if persons have a general idea of what their rights are. Even with COVID-19, where certain citizens apparently were turned away from their country of residence. I mean, all of that touches and concerns your right as a human being, as a citizen. So if it can be introduced from a high school level, a primary school level, tertiary level, I think it'll be very good because persons will be able to approach different scenarios that they experience with a more informed perspective.
Okay. Anybody else want to add to that? I have a last question here, and then anybody else wants to ask any question from our listening audience, feel free to type it in, and we'll go from there. This one is in relation to employees and working in any job situation. And the question is this: legally, who protects the employees? The government, the employer, or is it the job for them to protect themselves or to join a union to protect them? Well, what is the process in relation to that? And when I say protect, I'm talking about should something happen to a person on the job, or should they get threatened? For example, let's use the teaching profession. And you might have a rowdy person, you might have somebody who, a juvenile delinquent, who might attack a teacher. At that point, is the person protected by the country, or they would have to deal with a lawyer, hiring one to basically have some protection if their rights are concerned? How does that work? Tamika, you're thinking.
Yeah, I can go. He dancing. He can go.
I wasn't, Joel, you might know better than me this part because obviously you worked in Dominica for some time. I'm not sure how big we are on unions in the Caribbean region. For some reason, I think that's more of an American thing where your union is bargaining for you and your union is making sure you get paid on time and you get your benefits, and if something happens, that they look out for you. I also know that have a lot of labor laws and labor codes within the region. So for instance, here in the BVI, we have a labor code, and the labor code will explain certain things, how you can lay someone off, how you can deal with someone as it turns to severance packages and all of that. So wherever you are unjustly treated, you can resort to the labor code. Because most of the times, if you're working for the government, Joel, it might be a conflict of interest, obviously, for the government to try to protect your interests as well as theirs. So in a case where you're working for the government, obviously you can hire a private attorney. They can make reference to the labor code, and then we can take it from there. For persons who are not working for the government, you might ask, what recourse do they have? In those situations, those persons are usually employed on a contractual basis. So your contract will usually govern your relationship. So if there's some liability on the job, the contract will usually speak to whether or not that liability will be covered by your employer, whether it will be covered by outside insurance. So for instance, the example you use as a teacher, if a child is being rowdy and attacks you in the school, I would like to think the government would step in to ensure that you have some sort of protection there. If you're at a private school, I would like to think the board who runs that school would step in to ensure that you have some sort of recourse for the injury you may have suffered. So in terms of the region, you can either go back to your contract, because most contracts are usually very comprehensive. I can tell you, employers cover their behind, so they ensure that you have some sort of tribunal to resort to. You either have some sort of insurance coverage that you must be a part of, you must be party to. Where the contract fails you, then you can go to the legislation. Most countries have labor legislation, employment laws. Where that also fails you, we have what we call common law. And that is basically pulling from different cases that the courts would have decided on. So it might be a new circumstance in Dominica, and your attorney can go and say, well, okay, the court decided a similar case in St. Vincent, and this is what they said, this is what they suggested. So one way or the other, you have some sort of protection at every stage as an employee. Unfortunately, again, for lack of knowledge, most employees don't know that. So they get fired, no severance pay, no notice, improper termination, and they go, they vent on Facebook, and that's the end of it. Not knowing that obviously there is some legal action that they can take against the employer. It all boils back down to knowing your rights.
Not knowing they're sitting on $100,000. Yeah, okay, that does make a lot of sense in relation to that question, but one of the issues though that I understand your answer, but isn't there some risk of victimization? Should you maybe try to go against whether it is your employer or whoever is that board over you, as a result of the actions that you take in relation to getting a lawyer, for example?
Yeah, I think there's always some risk of victimization. Even when you contradict your boss in the workspace, there's some risk of victimization, because then they might find different ways, to victimize you and to penalize you. But I think it's usually the last resort. So for you to resort to needing an attorney, it has to be something that obviously your supervisor has not addressed, the manager has not addressed. So it's either you accept your losses or you invoke your rights. And yeah, they might be upset, Joel, but at the end of the day, that is why the law is there, to protect you. They cannot just fire you even if they're upset, because again, you are protected. For instance, you may have tenure, you may have a contract renewal term. They cannot just up and decide, well, Joel has been causing me difficulties. He's went to the union 3 times. I'm going to fire him December month. And no, they need to have some sort of justifiable cause as to why they're going to release you. Or like you said, you might go with your $100,000. And then I don't think you will care about victimization. Because you will be $100,000 richer. But I think it's a risk that comes that you just have to accept.
There's a follow-up question in relation to that in the group there. It says, many are afraid to seek legal protection because for fear of receiving threats or being attacked by the accused and involved individuals. How do you respond to that?
It is something that we've had to deal with here. And the law tries to afford protection to these people. For example, there is something called ex parte applications. So for instance, if you're in a relationship with someone and they are abusing you and they are beating you, you might not want to go to the police because, it might be public knowledge. You might not want to, call all your friends and family, but you can make an ex parte application, which basically is an application to a judge in private. It's not going to be recorded by reporters. It's not going to be reported. You go to the judge if you're an attorney and you explain to the judge, this is what is happening to me. These are my bruises. These are the amount of times I've visited the hospital. And then the judge can now take measures to protect you. But at the end of the day, it comes back to whether or not you are willing to do what you have to do to get away from that aggressor. Because there's only so much the law can do for you. From the time that a police officer goes to the aggressor and says, you need to stay away from X, obviously they're going to realize that you've made a complaint to someone.
Yes.
So the burden lies on you to determine if you have to leave the house, stay with relatives, have a peer partner, have someone call you every hour. Because truth be told, where there is an aggressor in a relationship, you have to confront that person. There's only so much the law can do without you confronting them for yourself. And that's why you find a lot of persons staying in abusive relationships or in abusive situations because of fear of how the person may retaliate, especially in jurisdictions, God forgive me for saying this, like some of our Caribbean jurisdictions where justice seems to be so slow. Like you might make a report to the police this morning and they don't show up to your house until later tonight. Or you might try to have the police come and escort the person out from your home on Friday, and on Monday morning the person is still having breakfast in your home. So it makes it difficult, but at the end of the day, the onus also lies on you. How badly do you want to come out from the situation, and what are you doing?
Okay, interesting. And then the person adds, as relates to education system, children's rights seem to be louder than teachers.
Joel, you could answer that. You've taught.
Yes, I have. But I'm not the legal professional here, so I have to deter that one to Tamika.
I agree to some extent. My mother is a teacher by profession, and she also lives in this territory. I think she's on the live, so she forgives me for saying this. But on the Zoom call. But I think one of her reservations for going into the profession here was because of the amount of restrictions on teachers as it pertains to interacting with students. Because students can say what they want, eat when they want, use their phone, shout at you. You cannot hit them. You cannot use abusive language. You cannot tell them to go outside. So it really seems like we are in an era right now where the children seem to have more rights than the teachers. And even practicing in the criminal profession, sometimes I am sitting in court and I am just baffled, because in my mind, the things that juveniles get away with in 2020 and 2019, I would be 6 feet under had I done some of those things that my parents. And then you see the way that the court deals with the parents in terms of holding them accountable for the actions of their children. But at the end of the day, we've tied the parents' hands to some extent, because we're saying to the parents, if you use a belt to beat your child, we might refer to that as abuse of child. You use a broomstick, you use a wooden spoon, you use a hanger, all the popular Caribbean instruments for a good old spanking. We turn around and we charge the parents for abuse of child. But at the end of the day, when that same child goes out and robs a store with a firearm, we pull the parent into court and say, you are not doing a good enough job. And it trickles down to teachers, because if parents cannot discipline their children the way they see fit, you can only imagine the restrictions that are on teachers where that is concerned. So to some extent, children seem to have more rights than teachers. I feel we just need to find a way to navigate how we're going to deal with them, or hope and pray that parents invest more into their children at home, so we won't have to deal with some of the behaviors we see in the primary level and secondary school level.
Yeah, and I would agree with you to that extent, where the restrictions are very difficult for somebody in the classroom to use the level of discipline, because regardless of the age group, whether it is a young preschooler up to, you know, the college age, there are restrictions as far as discipline is concerned. I'm not talking about corporal punishment, but just any level of discipline,
Right.
the restrictions, because your hands are tied.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, you know, and one of the difficulties, I guess, is also the extreme to which something could be taken, and you always have to be politically correct. Sometimes it may seem in certain professions. So that's interesting. Tamika, so you're asking for your views on that. Anything else to add there?
I guess we're past the employment thing, but there are like key differences between how things are handled, I guess, back home and up here in terms of rights and people not knowing their rights. Because it varies by jurisdiction. In terms of children, they have a lot more rights in the States than they have in Dominica, or if they have those rights in Dominica, I don't know, because to me, I don't ever remember the restrictions that I see being put on. And my mom is also a teacher by profession and was also hesitant when she moved to the US to actually go into teaching for those same reasons, because like, you can't shout at them. You can't put them in, you can't, like, you know, back home they make you write lines. You can't make them write lines. You can't, they used to say that you can put them in timeout, but now they have this whole thing that when you isolate them, it impacts their psychological development. Like, they have so many things that it makes it hard to control kids. But I think the sad part about it is the fact that although children have these rights, they're still being abused, they're still being trafficked. So I feel like the rights that the children have are not protecting the right children. I don't know if you get what I'm saying. Like, the right children are not protected by their rights, because it's the mother who gives the child a slap across her face once is who child services is going to come and ask questions. But the person who beat their child day and night like a drum, they still have that child abusing that child. They still sex trafficking that child. They're still, so I feel like the rights are needed, because, you know, the kids have to have a right to, you know, Tasha P said, let children be children. But I still feel like the restrictions are not being enforced in a way that makes sense. Everybody knows it's wrong to abuse a child, but to make it so difficult for parents to discipline their children in the first place is very, to me, it's not very, you know, counterproductive, basically.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you guys would like to add? We're going to close it up here this evening. You've been amazing with your input, and I really appreciate you coming on here with me as we zoom into different topics and talking about this one here, just knowing and understanding the legal system, what we should know about his or her rights. So anything you want to add in closing here? Tamika, you want to start, and then Kel will finish us off. What everyone should know about his or her rights, understanding the legal system. Can you just give us either a summarization, or can just give us a final word that we can take with us?
I think it's always important to do your research and don't just assume that something is, don't just assume that it's fine, or don't assume that you have a right that you, because Google's your best friend. I always say that. If you have a situation, you can Google anything. What should I do if I'm frying chicken and the oil goes on my hand? They'll give you a whole long list of things you should do. So Google has this thing where some lawyers even participate in like discussion boards. I feel like if you're in doubt about something, you need to find the help, because people always try to negate the need for lawyers. A lot of people always feel like I can do it myself. Like up here, they have pro se, you can represent yourself. Everybody wants to represent themselves. But at the end of the day, if you do not adequately know your rights, you're not aware of it, you're not going to give yourself very good representation anyways. So I think the key thing that people should do is always, do your research. When in doubt, find out. Because you may be sitting, like you had a car accident, you may be sitting on a $500,000 settlement, but in Dominica, I see you get into a car accident, you tell the person to pay for your car, they pay for your car, and you're done, and then you stop paying your medical bills for the rest of your life.
Alrighty. So, Kel, what's your last thoughts for us before we?
I echo Tamika's sentiments, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I would just emphasize that as a Caribbean people, as people in general, we should really try to grasp the information that is available to us, because we are in an era now where law is no longer presented to the public in Latin terms and in complicated terms. They've tried to simplify things a lot, so it could really help if you are in the know. So the government might post something in terms of a curfew order. Don't just take the government's word for it. Open that curfew order, read it for yourself. You never know when it may come in handy for yourself or your family member. I'm not expecting you to pick up, a law book and go through chapter and page, but generally when material is being circulated, I think, try your best to go through it, have an idea of what it is speaking to, and I think that would make life easier for everyone, because the more you are aware of your rights, I think the more comfortable you can exist in a society. Joel, thank you very much for having me. Allow me to use the opportunity to say that I'm sure Tamika and I enjoyed the experience. I hope it was helpful and informative.
I really appreciate you guys being here, and I hope in the future we can have you again. What's that?
Someone asked a question privately. They said, what keywords, basic rights and laws are necessary to be taught in the classroom? What key rights and laws are necessary to be taught in the classroom?
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I guess the basic rights, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of association, basically just the basic rights in the constitution of whatever country you live in. Like, I feel like that is always something that you need to, teach to kids. Here in America, I think that due to the current climate, they need to probably start having classes like civics, where they actually tell these students, male students specifically, what are your rights? You get stopped by a cop. Do you have to let them search your car, or do you have a right to decline a search? A lot of people think that because the police tell you get out of the car, they can just search your car, but they can't. You actually have a right to decline that search. And if they still want to search you, they need to go get a warrant. Now it's 3 o'clock in the morning. You really think a judge gonna wake up in his bed to sign that warrant? So chances they might just let you go. So those type of things, I believe, are key to having the students these conversations of what to do when you're stopped by a police officer, what to do when, if you're being arrested, like basically how do you behave? And it's sad that we have to teach those things in schools, but that's where they're gonna get the knowledge, because they're not gonna get it on the street, they're not getting it from the news.
But what you just said there could get you killed too. Because if I get pulled over, for example, and I say, well, I know my rights, and they ask me to hand over my driver's license or step out the car, and I say, nah, I don't want to. I run the risk of losing my life.
No, that's not how it is. What happens is this. That's why now President Obama, well, I don't like mentioning the presidents because it's politics, but they instituted this whole body camera thing, right? So the officers are now required to wear a body camera, and whenever they encounter anybody, those cameras have to be on. If it's off, that's your butt. So basically, they have to ask you to search. They can't just tell you, unless they have probable cause, which is like a reason that, okay, they know you have a dead body in the trunk. They can under those circumstances. But if they stop you like in a routine traffic search, they're gonna ask you, may we search your car? If you're asked whether or not they can search your car, you can decline. And if you decline, just like you can decline a breathalyzer, if you're caught driving drunk, you can tell them you don't want the breathalyzer. In some states, when you decline it, it's called an assumption of guilt. They can assume you're guilty because you decline it, but you have a right to decline the search. You have a right to decline the breathalyzer. It's your right, because by allowing them to search your car, they're infringing on your right to privacy. And that's a constitutional right. So that's above and beyond. I've never heard, in all the cases where they kill Black people, I've never heard that they got killed because they declined the search. Because you're allowed to decline a search and the officers know you're allowed to decline the search. So oftentimes they just let you go because they can't force you unless they have a warrant.
Interesting. Well, I gotta have you guys on again sometime in the future. I hope so. Maybe on some other topic that comes up. And I'll encourage all those who are listening today that to tune in again. I'll be doing a number of different calls, like similar to this. And the next one I have planned is talking about the beauty of photography. So we're talking to a lot of different photographers throughout the Caribbean. So hopefully you can tune in. That'll be next week, Tuesday at 8 o'clock. So if you guys can all jump on board, and hopefully we have some great discussions going on with that. And after that, we have a lot planned, education and different other topics. I got one called Life Hacks, what I wish I could tell my younger self. So hopefully you all will come in and give some good questions, and maybe you might even have Kale and Tamika back on that one again if they're interested.
I need some life hacks right now.
I need a malt.
Well, thank you all for being here this evening, and I hope you have an awesome rest of the week, and we'll talk again soon. All right, so I'll see you guys next week.
Bye.